Hi, so today basically we're going to talk about origin of species. So let's get started on it. So first thing we're going to talk about is speciation. Okay, speciation basically right here talks about origin of species. How does species come about? So you guys can probably think of it like two different ways. Okay, there's two different type that we will be talking about. Microevolution, which is this one, changes within a single gene pool, and a macroevolution, which is evolutionary changes above the species level. So you can think about like microwave, small stuff. Okay, microevolution is changes within the smaller population. Okay, macroevolution, it's changes that occurred in a much larger level. Okay, so micro, it's kind of like small, macro, big. Okay, so those two different type, and those two different type of evolution help us to create different, well, us by nature, help nature to create different types of species. So biological species concepts. So before we talk about speciation, we need to know what species. So species is defined as population or group of populations whose members have the potential to interbreed in nature and produce viable, fertile offspring. Okay, so viable and fertile offsprings. That's a key. Okay, sometimes they might not produce viable offspring. Sometimes they might not produce fertile offsprings. So these two are the key to species. Okay. So well, if we talk about species, we need to talk about some kind of barriers to prevent species from forming. So that's going to be talking about the reproductive isolation. Okay, reproductive isolation is basically the barrier, so difficulty that prevents any individual from any two species, let's say, from producing offsprings or hybrid offsprings. So those two, species and reproductive isolation, two things on this slide. Okay, so let's talk about barriers. Okay, type of different kind of reproductive barriers. So we have pre-zygonic barriers and post-zygonic barrier. Zygo, which is this word, zygo. Okay, zygo is basically talking about an egg has been fertilized. That's called zygo. Pre-zygonic, basically before the fertilization has occurred. Okay, post-zygonic, after the fertilization has occurred. So let's talk about the pre-zygonic first. Okay, so we're gonna talk about different type. Okay, this usually happens before fertilization occur. Okay, not usually. This happens before fertilization occur. So there's a few types that you can see. So the first one, habitat isolation, temporal isolation, not temporal, temporal isolation, behavioral isolation, mechanical isolation, and gammatic isolation. And we'll go over it next slide. So I'm just going to quickly tell you what it is. Okay, so this is before fertilization. Now, after fertilization, post-zygonic barriers. So this is prevent after the egg has been fertilized. This is how kind of like the cells, more the cellular level barriers. So you have reduced hybrid viability, reduced hybrid fertility, and hybrid breakdown. And again, we're going to talk about this in the next slide. Oh, my apology. My antivirus. Okay. Anyway, next. Okay. So type of the reproductive barriers. So this is talking about pre-zygonic, as you can see right here, pre-zygonic. So everything happened on this slide is before the egg has been fertilized. So right here, the blue dot and orange dot right here, those are essentially two individuals. So think of it as I don't know, two humans. If you don't think about human, snakes. They have snakes here. They have birds. They have snails. They have crazy stuff here. So two individuals from some kind of species. Okay. So the first thing you can see is habitat isolation. So habitat, two different locations. So you can almost think of it as long-term relationship. Okay, long distance relationship, not long term relationship. Long distance relationship. Okay, if you don't see each other, you're probably not gonna end well. And in animal kingdoms, when you don't see each other, there's absolutely no communication between two species. So if you don't communicate, it just doesn't end well because you just don't know each other exists. Okay, so for human, it's much easier because you can pick up the phone and you can still maintain. But in this case, in natural world, habitat isolation, it's almost guaranteed to be a reproduction barrier. Let me move this a little bit. Okay. Second thing, temporal isolation. Again, not temporal. Temporal isolation. Okay. Tempo. I mean tempo, not tempo. Temperature. Okay, this is talking about temperature. Not really exactly temperature, but it's almost talking about if you have a different mating season. Okay, let's say this individual, this group, so I don't know, skunk, squirrel, horse, whatever, they like to mate in the summer, and the next group likes to mate in the winter. So they're just not gonna mate because when one side is ready, the other side's not. So it's like, okay, so what are we gonna do? So basically, they don't do anything because they don't really talk to each other because they're not human. So it just doesn't happen. So this is a form of barrier, okay? Temporal isolation. And next one, behavioral isolation. So this is, imagine, okay, you guys know I'm engaged. So if before me and my fiance start dating, if we don't have the same taste of music, we don't have the same taste of food types, we just don't have any interest that's common, we just have nothing in common, then our behavioral is completely different. We probably not gonna be engaged right now. Okay, so it's almost the same thing with animals. If they behave differently, they're just not gonna happen. Okay, or another example that it's kind of interesting. I recently saw. I don't think I show you guys. I don't remember if I show you guys in the classroom, but there's a kind of spider called peacock spider. So what a peacock spider do before they mate is the male will perform a little dance for the female, and that dance is very specific, and the female peacock spider is very picky. So in order to mate, the male spider has to do a really good job at dancing. So imagine there's some other type of spider comes along and say, you know what, I'm gonna try to mate with peacock spider female. If they don't do a dance well, then they're probably not gonna mate. So this is another type of behavioral isolation that is talked about here. So another example. So let's say they pass all three. It's great. They have the same habitat. They have the same mating season. They have the same behavioral, and then they will try to mate. Okay. Even when they try to mate, there's two more: mechanical isolation and dynamic isolation that'll prevent reproduction from happening. And mechanical isolation is basically talking about, let's say peacock spider. A butterfly wants to mate with peacock spider. Just because they're so different, they're just not gonna be able to mate because they're physically they're just incompatible. So that incompatibility would prevent the mating from happening. So it's also a reproductive barrier. Okay. Now gammetic, I can never say this right. Gammetic isolation is basically when gamete is basically the sperm and the egg. Okay, so sometime coral reef will release a lot of sperms. Okay, and try to fertilize everything. Okay, so what happened is the gamete, the sperm and the egg, they actually needs to know each other kind of. Okay, because they're kind of specifically designed for each other. So with, let's say, the same type of coral, actually sea urchins a good idea. I should just use sea urchin. Anyway, sea urchins, let's use sea urchins. Sea urchins, the same type of sea urchins has almost 99%, almost to 100% success rate for fertilizing eggs. So the same type of sperm will go to fertilize the same type of egg from the same type of sea urchins. Okay, and it's almost 100% success rate. However, if a different type of sea urchin comes and release those sperm, because they're a different type of sea urchins, it drops the percentage so low that it will prevent fertilization from going on. So that's kind of like an example of gametic isolation. Okay, so let's say if they all pass all 5 isolation barriers, then fertilization will occur. Okay, then now we're gonna talk about next slide, post-zygonic barriers. My apology. So this is talking about after fertilization. See right here? It's continuation of last slide. So after fertilization, there is more barriers that the reproduction process needs to overcome before they can have a successful and viable and fertile offspring. So now let's look at this one. The first one that we will see here is reduce hybrid viability. So basically, hybrid, whatever after the egg fertilize, whatever the baby is gonna become, it's just not going to survive. Okay, simple as this. Okay, it fertilized the egg, sperm fertilized the egg, but the egg just doesn't really produce to any offspring. They just either die or somehow it just didn't work out. So that's one way. That's one type of barrier. Okay, and that happens at the cellular level. Okay. The next type is reduce hybrid fertility. Again, as you can see, horse, donkey, mule. Okay, so what happened is when the parents mate, they will produce offspring. However, the offspring will not be able to produce another type of offspring or next level offspring. So let's say mommy meets daddy, a male meets female, and they produce their baby. Okay, and their baby won't produce any child for their grandparents. So they basically just stop right there. So even though there is offspring from the first generation, but there's not going to be a third generation because the second generation won't be able to produce. So that's reduced hybrid fertility. Okay, the last one we'll be talking about is hybrid breakdown. And this usually happens at the grandson or the granddaughter level. So basically the grandparents mate, they found each other somehow and they mate and they have offspring. And the offspring also mate with some other offsprings. Okay. However, the grandsons or granddaughter just doesn't work. It either dies or it just doesn't grow at all. So basically it results kind of a dead end situation. Okay. So these are the 3 type of post-zygonic barriers that we will see, that we talked about, that you will read or you already read in the textbook. But let's say they overcome all 7, so overcome those 5, those 5, last 5, and these 3, then they will successfully produce the offspring that is viable and fertile. Okay, and that's a key to species. Now, next slide. Okay, there are other definitions for species. So morphological, so they can have different kind of body shape, size, other structure feature. Another type, it's ecological. Okay, so they can have different niche within the community. They can have different roles, and that will also create different kind of species. And phylogenetic. Okay, so they share the same common ancestor, and they kind of branch off from and form the tree of life, basically. So let me stop right here, and then I'll pick it up in the next video.